It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, and welcome to Monster Mondays. I'm Geoff Arbuckle, co-host of the weekly podcast Film Seizure that you can catch each Wednesday at filmseizure.com or at a number of podcast providers online. We're in the third week of our string of Universal Classic Monsters sequels, and this is technically the last one. Next week we do have one more Universal Classic, but this week is the last true sequel of the month. This week we're talking the final adventure of my personal favorite monster of the whole Universal gallery, the Gill Man. And in this adventure, the creature walks among us. The Creature Walks Among Us was released in 1956, about 13 months after Revenge of the Creature, which itself was only about 13 months after the first Creature from the Black Lagoon. It's pretty clear that Universal knew that they had something with this character. However, all good things must come to an end, and in this final installment, we get a little sympathy for the creature, and I'll dig into that in a little bit. But this is often considered the final of the Universal Classic Monsters series, although that's debatable. Sometimes they say it goes up to 1960 or 61 or so, but I tend to kind of agree that this is the last of the classic era of Universal monster movies. Now, this movie features the return of Rico Browning, doing the underwater stunts as the Gill Man. It should be noted that Browning, at 92 years old at the time of this episode's recording, is the final surviving Universal Classic monster. But he'd go on to do more stunt work and stunt filming and appear both in film and on TV for another 55 years after this movie's release. He even directed 37 episodes of Flipper between 1964 and 1967. Our two main stars of this movie playing the two doctors who have much interaction with the Gill Man are Jeff Morrow as Dr. Barton and Rex Reason as Dr. Morgan. Now, Morrow got into film a little later in life at the age of 45, but his stage experience dates back to his early 20s. His first film was the biblical epic The Robe, which was nominated for Best Picture. Interestingly enough, The Robe was also the first film ever shot and presented in CinemaScope, which is typically simply referred to as scope in projectionist vernacular today, and it's that 2.35 to 1 ratio. It's the wider widescreen. It's the skinnier, wider version than even what widescreen TVs are sold at today. But just before this film, Morrow appeared as Exeter in Universal's This Island Earth, which featured the Metaluna Mutant, a sort of final adjunct member of the Universal Classic Monsters lineup. The year following this movie would find Morrow appearing in the notoriously bad The Giant Claw, which someday should probably be featured on this show, but you can watch it if you go over to my B-Movie Enema YouTube channel, as I featured it there for the Thanksgiving weekend episode that I just did a few weeks ago. Now, meanwhile, Rex Reason was the star of This Island Earth as Cal Meacham, and he was recruited by Morrow's character as part of a group of Earth scientists to basically be included in the special research project that the Morrow's alien race was putting together. But Reason wasn't a gigantic star, but he did appear in a handful of TV series, including an episode of Perry Mason along with, guess who, Jeff Morrow. But he was in movies that starred Rita Hayworth, Clark Gable, and Sidney Poitier in his career. Now, one last thing to mention, the score for this movie was done by Henry Mancini. Now, Mancini is a massive name in music. He was nominated for 72 Grammys and won 20. I think they said he released 90-some albums in his lifetime. But all of those are huge numbers. But he was also nominated for 18 Oscars between 1954 and 1986. Most of those years were multiple nominations as well, because he would write a song as well as a score. But he was already an Oscar nominee by the time he got the credit for The Creature Walks Among Us. He ultimately won 4 Oscars. His first 2 were shared with Johnny Mercer for writing songs like Moon River, a gorgeous song that I personally love as well, and Days of Wine and Roses. in back-to-back years, 1961 and 1962, for Breakfast at Tiffany's and Days of Wine and Roses, respectively. He won a second Oscar for Best Dramatic or Comedy Score for Breakfast at Tiffany's, and finally he won his fourth for a defunct category once known as Best Original Song Score and its adaptation or Best Adaptation Score for Victor Victoria in the early 80s. He was a pretty big freaking deal. He was also one of the credited score writers for the original Creature from the Black Lagoon as well, and also for the other Universal movies, Tarantula, It Came from Outer Space, and guess what? Yep, This Island Earth. Now, of all the things that you should know for sure from Mancini, it's the Pink Panther theme. He ultimately would go on to do many Blake Edwards movie scores, even beyond the Pink Panther series, dating back to the 50s right through until Mancini died in the 90s. In fact, all four of those Oscars Mancini won were for movies directed by Blake Edwards. Now, coming straight off the previous entry, Revenge of the Creature, the Gill Man is still on the loose after escaping from Ocean Harbor Oceanarium. There's a boat that is setting sail to go into the Everglades to find the creature and capture him again. Dr. Barton, which is Jeff Morrow, arrives with his comely wife, Marcia, to meet with geneticist Dr. Morgan, who is Rex Reason. Morgan and Barton have a plan to position the Gill Man in still water where, while they're there, they will knock the creature out with a concentrated dose of this kind of knockout stuff, this anesthesia that they have. Marcia is a curious sort. Up on deck, she suddenly starts firing off shotgun rounds. Why? Well, it's because she saw a shark and decided to give it what for. That said, we do find out that she is a skilled huntress, and she's also skilled in other ways that gets a couple of the other fellas on the expedition interested in exactly what those skills are. But the men visit a gator hunter who was attacked by the creature in the Everglades. He was slashed across the face and maimed, where he now has this permanent limp. Barton has an idea: capture the creature and mutate him via his blood corpuscles. Morgan doesn't really like the idea, but Barton believes that this can help people and maybe even unlock secrets to how man could go to outer space and survive. Despite reservations, Morgan and crew decide to stay with Barton because they each have their own desires to study the creature. Along with field guide Jed Grant, Morgan goes into the water, but they are also joined by a bored and adventure-seeking Marcia. Now, because there's a girl with him, I'm guessing that gets the Gill Man out of his seaweed home in the water there, and he begins to stalk the trio before going off their trail to kind of hide. Meanwhile, due to the depths that she's gone without being very used to the experience, Marcia begins to get delirious, and this causes Grant and Morgan to have to give up on the Gill Man and save her. And after she's brought back to the boat, it appears that Dr. Barton is massively jealous and threatens Marcia to never leave or humiliate him. Later that night, the hunt for the Gill Man continues, and Morgan is curious about his hunting habits as he seems to be bringing the ship they're on into this trap. And Barton is ready to capture the creature alive, and Grant, meanwhile, is more than happy to shoot the creature dead himself if the creature so much as look at him funny. And he's quick to act when the creature attacks the little rowboat that they're on. And they're trying to basically flush him out and capture him. And he climbs up and he starts attacking people on this rowboat. But when he attacks, Grant hits him with the harpoons filled with tranquilizer. And then he seems to douse him with gasoline and lights him on fire. The creature attempts to attack again, but passes out from the drugs. And Morgan confirms that the creature also has third-degree burns. Morgan and Barton begin to study the creature, and the creature's gills are too badly damaged to be able to submerge him so that he can breathe normally again. But they do discover that he does have a lung forming inside his chest, and Barton saves the creature by performing a tracheotomy on him, which allows his lungs to start working. A short time later, the Gill Man's eyes change into something that looks much more human than what they were before. He kind of before always had those kind of beady, bug-eyed kind of look to him. But the creature's hands are also becoming more digit-like, and the webbing between the phalanges is starting to recede. When they remove the bandages on the creature's face, we see that his original scales have burned away, revealing a much more human skin. It's turning out that he has both sea creature and land creature features on his person. Now later, once Barton has returned to his compound where he's got a pen set up for the Gill Man to explore a little more, they even provide the creature clothing to wear. And Morgan believes that the Gill Man is not showing any hostility because he's repaying kindness with kindness. But Barton doesn't really buy into that. I think he believes that his kindness towards his wife, for example, is not being paid back to him. So that doesn't really show any kind of evidence that the creature is getting more intelligent by doing that if humans aren't doing that. Now, Morgan goes to Marcia to tell her that she should probably help her husband because he's a pretty troubled person. Later on, when a mountain lion jumps into the Gill Man's enclosure and kills a sheep, the creature kills the lion, and Morgan believes that he didn't revert back to his more base, violent nature, but he was defending himself or the sheep. Now, when Jed Grant taunts Barton over his wife and how he basically is planning on trying to steal her and everything, Barton pistol whips the man to death, and to hide his tracks, he dumps the body in the creature's enclosure. In the act of seeing Barton kill Grant and then seemingly understanding that he's putting the blame on the creature, makes the Gill Man fly into a fit of rage, and he nearly attacks Marcia and Dr. Morgan, but realizes that they aren't the ones that he's mad at or that he's looking for, and he eventually finds Barton, lifts him up over his head, and spikes him into the ground from the second story of Barton's home. The creature busts his way out of Barton's compound and makes his way back to the ocean, and that's how the Creature from the Black Lagoon trilogy ends. The creature, no longer really an amphibian, missing the water and trying to return. Whether or not he lives or dies in the attempt is unknown. Now let's talk about 3 things that I like about The Creature Walks Among Us. My first is the heavier slant on a science fiction angle. I've always felt that this trilogy has leaned more toward science fiction, in that the Gill Man is a scientific curiosity, more so really than a monster. I've always felt, that there were really kind of 2 things that solidified that in this entry. The first is that it definitely identified that the Gill Man is exactly in between mammals and aquatic creatures in his corpuscles. He's a missing link for something that hasn't come into fruition yet. There is something to study here. Even in the time of ultra-conservative 50s exceptionalism in the United States, this movie has no problem stating clearly that there is evolution at play. They all want to study it, but Morgan has even more Barton has even more space-age reasons for studying him. Somehow, by watching the rapid evolution of an amphibian to mammal, it will help unlock secrets for how man can live off the planet. I'm not sure how that works, but I like that this is kind of a larger concept than an amphibian man terrorizing people. Second, Jeff Morrow is great in this. He wobbles back and forth between his brilliance as a doctor and this jealous husband who can barely even look at his wife without thinking that she's clearly cheating on him. While she's nice to Dr. Morgan, she doesn't really seem to express any real romantic feelings for him. She likes him. She likes him a lot, but you don't get that impression even after it's over and Dr. Barton's dead and Morgan's kind of saying his goodbyes to her. There's no real conclusion there. There's no kiss. There's no real instance that you think, oh, these two are going to end up getting married to each other. But as for Jed Grant, he's constantly hound-dogging her, and she has time and again rebuffed him. But Rex Reason is more of a one-note altruistic hero type. Lee Snowden, who plays Marcia, is kind of set dressing. There can't be a Creature from the Black Lagoon movie without a bathing beauty, which she certainly fits the bill for. However, Geoff Morrow slowly deteriorates throughout this movie. It's very subtle. The more the Gill Man evolves, the more frayed around the edges Dr. Barton gets. He comes into this movie as this respected medical doctor, but by the end of the movie, he looks mean. He looks a little less put together. He's disheveled. He's gone cold, and Morrow's just great in this role. He's actually, I think, kind of a understated and kind of underappreciated actor, particularly in these monster movies. Thirdly, finally, the Gill Man is treated with some sympathy. Granted, Dr. Barton's a little too quote-unquote eyes on the prize, as it were, with wanting to forcibly evolve the Gill Man, but Dr. Morgan has a lot more understanding and appreciation of the Gill Man. He's understanding that even though these men were the creature's predator and prey at two different times in the Everglades, they also seemingly saved his life. That said, as he started to become, for a lack of a better term, civilized, there was also care to understand what he was feeling, too. In the end, he is not the villain of this movie, not like in the first two. He doesn't want to go grab Lee Snowden and make off with her as he did with the ladies in the first two installments. The only thing he really wants to do is to be left alone in the water so he can live his own existence. The real bad guy, as I pretty much mentioned previously, is Geoff Morrow. The creature is a misdirect, and we are allowed to really feel sorry for him. And I've always had a soft spot for the Lug because he was just trying to get along, and these people kept coming into his ecosystem and began messing with him. This is probably where you can really kind of roll this kind of appreciation and sympathy for this creature into The Shape of Water, which was Guillermo del Toro's Oscar-winning movie that basically adapted Creature from the Black Lagoon in a couple of ways. And I really kind of see that this is where you can really start to feel that, less the fear of this creature and more the sympathy for him. That wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. You can catch new episodes of Monster Mondays each Monday afternoon at filmseizure.com, as well as new episodes of Film Seizure every Wednesday morning at filmseizure.com. Don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and subscribe to Film Seizure to get both the Film Seizure podcast and Monster Mondays at your favorite podcast providers, as well as YouTube. And you can also check out my website, bmovieanima.com, to read new articles every Friday morning. Next time, we close out 2022 with the only non-sequel this Universal Classic Monsters sequel month. It's actually kind of a remake, and I'll explain it all when I talk about 1931's Dracula, the Spanish version. Until next week, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and stay spooky.